Hi, and welcome to Communities Connected, a land and lifestyle podcast brought to you by Alison. My name is Danette Beal. I'm Vice President of Marketing at Alison, and I am joined today by April Lamont. She is our co-founder and CEO of Alison, as well as our special guest, Nick Deacon. Nick is Development Manager at Johnson Development. Nick, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Good,
Doing great.
good. Thank you for joining the podcast with us. I'm really excited about this one because of just your immense set of skills, your certain skill set. Can you tell us a little bit about your background just to get started?
Sure. I feel like I probably have an untraditional background and as it relates to real estate development. So my background in college, I went to school for hospitality and event management. And so I bring that up because that is what I studied. And I wasn't an engineer. I didn't study architect and I studied event planning and project management. And so that's kind of how I got started. And I interned at a community in Florida and as the lifestyle and festival intern. And that's kind of where my love for master plan communities kind of first initiated. And I thought I was always going to end up at a hotel and working at a front desk or doing something to that nature. And I started working at a community in Florida, really enjoyed it. And then from there, had an opportunity several years and shortly after graduation, and to come to Houston and work at a Johnson Development community as their and director of fun. And so that was kind of how I got into and the Houston market and how I got into master plan communities and real estate. Started off just planning events and I was overseeing their large scale events, but also their small events for the residents, anything from, 20 people to thousands of people. And that was really my main day-to-day focus was that resident experience and all the events that we put on and to create that sense of community and with the homeowners. So I did that for several years and until at one point I was overseeing pretty much most of the Johnson Development portfolio and lifestyle directors or directors of fun. And then an opportunity came up, I want to say at this point, probably 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago, and to shift over and do something different. And so I did a short stint and working directly for an HOA, and then shortly thereafter joined the development side and directly with Johnson Development. So I've been there now 3 years. I've been here with Johnson Development and I'm the development manager overseeing in 3 communities, 2 that are at, kind of build out stage and then one that's just getting ramped up and started.
So let's dive into your experience as a lifestyle director. I know that at one point in time, you also worked for a property management company and oversaw quite a few different communities in that role. You know, can you tell us a little bit about the day to day or even some moments that might have stood out during your time there?
Oh, there's so many moments that have stood out over the years. And, I mean, one of the funniest moments that I have as a director of fun and when I was at Riverstone is I was coordinating with our and director of marketing at the time, and she wanted to do a co-hosted event, open it up to the public, bring in the public so that they can see the type of lifestyle that residents get to enjoy year long. And she said, I think it'd be great and to do a crawfish boil. I know I'm from Florida and I guess there's crawfish in Florida, but not in Miami really. And so I didn't know what crawfish was. I was like, what in the world is she wanting me to do? And so I just remember that as a funny experience because I had to do a lot of research behind it and to get that event planned that first year. And I had the brilliant idea of, trying to make crawfish fancy that first go around, which doesn't go hand in hand. But we fine tuned it as the years progressed, and it's still to date one of the more popular events for the community. Now it's just for residents, but
I
that's one
remember
of
that because we came out, um, and had a little booth
you did.
for
I
the
think that's when we had first launched in the Alison app for Riverstone was one
that's
of our
right.
first years for the Crawfish Bowl, and you guys had a booth out there trying to encourage residents to activate the app and how to
That's
utilize
right.
it and all that.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I think we were just as ignorant about what a crawfish was as you were. But your residents loved it, that's for sure.
Yes. And so, I mean, really the day to day and was different every day. And I mean, as a lifestyle director, we have kind of a lot of various hats on. I mean, obviously, the primary responsibility and the primary goal there was creating those events and and moments of connection for the homeowners, trying to connect them with their fellow neighbors and trying to form that sense of community. We have fairly large neighborhoods, but the ultimate goal is always to still have that sense of community within that large neighborhood. And so that was the primary responsibility of the lifestyle director, the director of fun. But then you add on a bunch of things on the back end, because with every fun party, every fun event, there's all the logistics on the backside, and organizing the generators, the tables, the insurance to avoid any liability risk, invoicing to get people paid. There's just all that side of things. And then you also kind of wear a semi-marketing hat, because you have to make sure you get information out about the event, get that out to the residents. And so there's a lot of pieces into it, and which is great. It keeps the day and different and as you move along. And then obviously, depending on the life cycle of and what point you are in your community, your role also vastly changes.
Yeah, so kind of looking at, with Riverstone and starting with that and some of your other communities, when you come in, just with the Crawfish Boil, you have to figure out the culture, not only from the resident experience side, but also from the operation side. You're kinda just jumping in. How do you how do you start with that and then, just add value right off the bat?
I like to look at it when we come in and do any event, any and function. One, we want to make sure that we're adding value to those homeowners and that they're going to actually enjoy it. And but we're also I never want to be afraid of trying something new. And at the end of the day, and we're here to make sure that all the residents get some sort of event that they're able to enjoy throughout the year. And so there may be some events that we only get 15, 20 people at, but those may be the only events, or that might be the only event that those residents attend the entire year. So those are just as valuable at times than those that are getting thousands of people. We just need to be cognizant of how we're kind of splitting up the funds throughout the year so that we're hitting the various demographics and the various markets. And but the end goal is we want to have opportunities that are attractive to everyone. Once we get to that point, once we get to the larger scale events, it gets more into what experience can you create. You can do a lot of this in small events, but it's a little bit more complex, because if you're planning an event for 15, 20 people, you want to limit the funds that you're also outputting towards that. And if you're planning an event for a few thousand people, then you have a lot more options. And so that's where I typically would look at and trying to cover those five senses. So how do we, have the taste side of things? How do we, what does it look like, and what does it feel like? And so really that's, and having studied events and grown up with that, that's kind of what makes it and apart set us apart from other functions and other events that you see in the industry, is when you cover those five details, those small little details are what and people remember and people think about. And so, Texas is hot, it's always hot. And even during the winter, we may get every once. I've been here now going on 13 years, but it's only snowed once, and it was not, I wouldn't consider it true snow. It was icy snow. And it's hot out here. And so we love doing, at some of our communities, like a winter wonderland event where we bring in, the fake snow, the ice that gets shifted into the snow. And so that brings a whole different sense and a whole different feel that a lot of these homeowners have never been able to experience because they haven't traveled to an area with snow. And so getting to create those kind of special moments.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. I used to work at I was also an event planner back in my day. It's quite a few years ago now, but it was always a challenge. That was the biggest thing for us, is how can you make every event memorable when you might have, for us it was 30 to 40 events per year, some of them very small and intimate like you said, and then others very large and big. And I remember one year in the middle of July in Montana, we still had snow. And so we did a ski and tea where they skied in the morning and golfed in the afternoon, and that was definitely one of those, maybe 4 or 5 years later, people were still talking about how they were able to ski in the middle of July. But yeah, that is definitely the challenge with event planning, and especially when you have so many different people within a community, is making it memorable and then also, keeping it on budget.
And also, I can imagine with all of these pieces and parts that you've been so adept, Nick, at balancing, it really honed your project management skills, which have a lot of application in beyond, right, event planning.
No, absolutely, I guess. And my biggest, when I was, looking to do that transition over into the development side of things, I remember, and while I was interviewing and discussing it, they were kind of asking me, "What are you the most worried about in transitioning over?" And I'm like, "Well, honestly, I feel like I've been doing project management now for a decade. I feel like I've been doing it for so long. There's so many moving pieces in events, so many moving pieces in managing people, that I think, that side of things, I think is going to be fine. I don't have any concerns there. I'm like, my biggest concern is, learning how to read a set of plans. I haven't read a set of construction plans except for building my house. And that wasn't even a full set of plans. That was my biggest and, technical side of things, trying to learn that. But I've been able to pick that up and pretty quickly. But the actual project management itself, I felt, there was a lot of those transferable skills from back when I was doing and the event management, and then even beyond that, the managing of the event planners at the community level.
So one of those, looking at kind of moving over to the development side, you're really moving from more of an execution role where every single day you're doing something and you're planning out, maybe the next 3 months at a time, maybe the next year, but you're moving into really a visionary role where you're setting the vision out and looking much long term. How was that transition?
It was great. I loved it. And the transition, I mean, you have a different set of eyes or a different lens, a different perspective. But and really, to your point, I went from utilizing the amenities that had been provided and by Johnson Development or by another developer and activating those spaces. I went from that side of things to wearing the hat of the person that was involved alongside and my colleagues and consultants in designing those spaces that the residents will get to use. And I think I brought some unique perspectives, and I still bring some unique perspectives from being the person that utilized those spaces. But I think it's just as rewarding to be able to be behind the scenes now planning out those spaces and then seeing them utilized and enjoyed by residents as it was being the person that was activating the spaces themselves.
That's a great point, Nick. The ability to be able to foresee how the space is going to be used, and not just tactically, but to your point of how do we create this great experience for the people that live here. Are there some examples maybe where you were able to bring an insight that wasn't obvious to the rest of the team based on your prior experience?
Yeah, I think there's been, some small things and some large things. And it
Yeah.
just as each site's a bit different. And so it depends on the scale of the site and what its intended use is going to be. But I think, on just some practical elements, there's been a couple times where, in communities, we've installed these electrical power bases, right? And we wanted to install those, whether that's for food trucks, whether it's for a band. And, a lot of times we just rely on a consultant that shares, oh, this should be enough, this should be great. Well, we found that in some cases where the electrical source did not provide enough power, for the food truck. It was good enough to plug in a speaker, but it wasn't good enough to power a food truck, or vice versa. We put this and power source into a whole bed of rose bushes that have thorns left and right. And so, from a practical perspective, I'm not, people are gonna have to dig in there and get all cut up to utilize it. And so I think there's some of those and small elements that you've been able and to identify in the design phase and fix it from the design phase that you don't have to come back afterwards and retro that in, or you don't have to reimagine the wheel as you're doing the next facility. We're kind of learning from that. And I think there's also been, maybe some larger things learned, as early in my days planning events. As I mentioned earlier, we're in summer here in Texas, it's hot, so we do a lot of things over at the pool. Planning events at the pool, you have to work with the pool management company, and they dictate how many lifeguards are appropriate based on how many people you're anticipating. And so learn very quickly that, we like pretty pools out here. We like large pools. And so that tends to have a lot of, curves and elements that you wouldn't think anything of beyond, oh, it looks great, it looks nice. But when we do these events and they start saying, oh, well, zero entry where you have that sharp curve, it creates a 4 inch and gap of water there that's not visible from this guard stand. So you need to have another guard, that stands here dedicated to this area. And, that just adds real money both on the operational side, but even if you're just doing it for an event perspective on the event budget side.
Yeah, it's something that, we've been talking a lot about social architecture and operationalizing lifestyle. And, I think one of the ways that you have a very unique set of skills for your role now is you put in the beautiful pool and you might be missing some of those, more functional elements. And down the road, those have exponential cascading impacts, not only to efficiency, but to your budget. So even though it might be more cost effective at this point in time, I'm not saying that that's the reason why you did it, but down the road, it actually ends up costing quite a bit more money. So I can imagine just with your lifestyle experience and kind of being able to see the future into how that space is going to be used, you know, 2, 3, 4, 10 years down the road, you're able to kind of catch a lot of those, um, small nuances that other people might not be able to catch because they're not really sure about how to use that space.
No, I do. I agree. I think we certainly have the ability to catch a lot of those smaller items. I mean, some things probably still slip through the crack. We still learn. We do new events. We find out new things, but we're starting from an elevated point to begin with, which is the great aspect or the great and benefit, I guess, is that we're starting from a point where some of those maybe more common items are addressed and taken care of and as we move forward. And I mean, it's not just, yes, there's the fiscal side of things and the money side of things, but it's also the experience side. And with the homeowners, sometimes the way that we design something is not as intuitive to the normal day-to-day homeowner. And we put an entrance where we expect to be the main entrance, and our side entrance becomes the main entrance because that's what's actually most convenient. And so I think there's just a variety of different things and lenses to look through when we're designing these spaces. And because we want them to be activated, we want them to be utilized, and but we also need to make sure that we're being efficient in how we design it so that what we put in the ground and what we intend on having for the residents is actually and doable and feasible and workable for those homeowners.
I hear in there that there's the intention and then there's the organic use. And having worked on so many projects, Nick, I can imagine that you've seen, it's just like we created this path and everyone wants to go this way. The natural organic movement is perhaps different. So that's an interesting perspective to bring in at the very beginning is like, well, why not make that, what we thought was the side, the main, or this is going to be the gravitational pull almost, if you will, that people are going to be attracted to.
I mean, and some of it just is a matter of because it's not always that something is going to be less expensive or more expensive or less convenient, and sometimes it's just we just don't think about what can be done. Instead of putting in a parking lot that has two rows where you can maybe block off the front row where you can have food trucks and still have that back row for people to park so that you have less street parking. And there's a lot of times where parking lots, you just go in and there's just one giant lot and that's all you have versus separating it into certain rows. So, I mean, there's just some subtle shifts in design that can really make it a lot more and user friendly and a lot easier for the end user being the lifestyle director and then the homeowners enjoying those events to create an experience. So one of the things that if you've known me over the years is like I'm very particular about how things look and the aesthetics of things. And so when I was doing events, I didn't want a random car in my event space. I didn't want a random and sign that's not meant to be within the event. It's there for the pool, prominently featured in the center of my event. And so creating, those isolated areas that the event planner can go and kind of brand towards that event exclusively and is something that I value and I try to provide that opportunity for because everything is not everything is how the aesthetics behind it, but you show up to an event and like I mentioned earlier, those small details matter, and so being able to have that space kind of be like a blank starting point for you is important.
I'm really curious, you know, years past, communities used to just put up these big amenity centers or, welcome centers, and it was like, check the box and move on, but communities now are really starting to feel and talk to the residents more and understand, as residents are brought on, how is this community going to evolve with the experience that they want? How do you think about that as a development manager and, you're planning out these different spaces and you have assumptions and they're very good assumptions based on your experience, but then when residents start to get in there, how are you thinking about that moving forward?
That is a very, very hard task to accomplish. And not because, we don't want to build what the residents want and ultimately or what they want to see. But, I guess we have a sample size right now of what our future resident and is going to look like. You know, Jubilee, as an example, we're at, between 400 to 500 closed homes. And what the residents that are currently living there now and want may not be the same as what our ultimate 4,000 home group of residents as a majority would decide that they would like. And so that's a difficult task. And there's been many of our communities in the past that have sent out surveys as the development progresses, and they've identified sites future along in the development. And they've kind of, they have the size of it. And based on the size, they work with the consultants of like, what can we truly fit in there? Can we fit in a tennis court? Can we fit in a dog park and an event lawn with a pavilion, a playground? Like, what are the elements that we could fit into this site? And then, they create a survey that gets sent out to the current homeowners saying, hey, this is the future amenity site. Here are some of the items that, could work within the site. And can you rank it from, most desired to least desirable? And, based on that feedback, they try to make that site most and applicable towards what those homeowners were wanting to see.
Even the community is as far along as Riverstone. I think you've got a great example of that. It's a tennis crazy community, and yet, there's a burgeoning pickleball contingency. And talk about how that factored into the emerging amenity plan there.
Right, yeah. Riverstone's a great example, and I'll touch on that, April, but just in general with Riverstone, one of the things that I think I've learned over the years with Riverstone is as we build out these amenity sites, and quite often, we're utilizing pretty much all of the land in that rec center for what we have intended to at that moment. I find it important now as we're designing new communities that we leave maybe some empty fields, and as part of that amenity, maybe it's just a big lawn space that's currently used as an event lawn, but that allows the community in the future, fast forward 20 years or so, if not more than that, like the Riverstones, where they want to implement additional amenities, they still have some locations to do it. Because the biggest thing is you can't foresee things in the future in terms of popularity. Pickleball wasn't and popular when they started Riverstone, when they built those courts. It was not something that was widely requested and outside of primarily active adult communities. And so now, Riverstone has the ability, because there's still some land on that site, to introduce pickleball. And so Riverstone is, as April mentioned, one of those communities where they love their tennis. And they started off with two tennis courts. And in 2014, another eight were added at the Club at Riverstone complex. And since then, those have been jam packed and utilizing the app. Many times we've been able to pull the analytics and see just how much use and not outside of just seeing them out there, we have the data to back up how much is used. And so over the years, there's been several amenities that have been added to support and, the tennis and racket ball interest out there. Here most recently, and they're not quite done yet. They're getting there. They're almost done and almost ready to be opened up. But the HOA led the effort and to install and pickleball courts. And I believe they're installing four pickleball courts, three or four pickleball courts, and on that same site next to the tennis court area, and because the residents have really wanted to see that expansion.
That's a great idea to leave that flexibility that not everything has to be completely done so rigidly on day one. It allows the community to kind of unfold over, like you said, it could be decades later, but they have the flexibility. That's really smart.
Yeah, and I just wanna make a note, we had Haley Peck from Jubilee on, or Johnson Development on, talking about Jubilee, and I think one of the when you talk about setting the vision and how the marketing comes into that and the expectation for the community, I think Jubilee is a really great example of the thoughtful marketing and just curation of the community has come to where I can imagine it just organically kind of fits in with the expectations of what residents want. It always doesn't line up the way that you want it to, but it just seems like all of the work and effort that you're putting in for that community in particular really sets it up for the best success.
No, yes. Jubilee is fun. I love and working on Jubilee. It's a fun project. It has a great vision behind it. And as you heard with Haley, with the vision of being intentional and the marketing's very intentional, pretty much everything we do in Jubilee is very intentional. And so it takes us a little longer to get some things accomplished, some and sites built, because we're doing a lot more research, and we're trying to integrate how we can do some wellness element within those amenity sites and to fit within the theme of the community overall. And really, and this is not isolated to Jubilee, but I think what happens nowadays with new communities is we can never move fast enough. And in the sense of what residents want to see on the ground, what they want to be able to enjoy and utilize, we are just never not able to keep up with how much and they're wanting to see. We have wellness zones at Jubilee. We have our first phase of the rec center open with the large resort style pool, and we have a splash pad, and we have playground, and the residents are already and asking us when are we going to have the fitness center, and when are we going to have some sports courts. And so it's great to see the engagement. It's great to see that, and they're wanting to stay within the community, utilize those spaces. But it also becomes a challenge at some point, because and we develop amenities as we develop the community, and we want to kind of have them spread out throughout the community, not isolated in our first phase. And it's one of those unique challenges. It's great to see the engagement and the positivity behind what's being created, but it's also a stressor because I'm like, I know everybody wants the next thing coming up. I get it.
Yeah, it's talking about the next big thing, I'm curious, and it might be an answer that we already know, but what is the next big amenity, or what is the next pickleball court or popular thing that people are really thinking about? Is it wellness? Is it, something else? Do you have any idea?
I don't. And I mean, I think it changes as society changes. We had COVID, and emerging out of COVID, the trail system became important, right? Now, trail systems to me, I don't want to call them boring, and because they're not, but as an event person, I can't really activate a trail system very much. I feel like we've been doing those. Johnson has been doing trail systems in our communities probably decades, and so it's not something new. It's something that's kind of already incorporated into our everyday logistics when we are planning out the community in our next sections. And so that's been covered, but that's really what came out. And there was a lot of studies done shortly thereafter that that was like the number one requested amenity by homeowners. And so that's why it throws me off. So I don't know if pickleball is something that's obviously a new site. It's something that, you have to plan for, something that's not, wasn't really done in the past and to the level that it is now. Trail systems are. And so if it can shift from one and dimension like that to another, it's very dynamic in terms of what to expect. It's hard to anticipate exactly what the residents are going to want to see in the future. Now, what I will say is that we have been seeing a lot of traction behind the wellness side of things. People are still utilizing the trails. They're still utilizing those and fitness opportunities, those social connection moments, but they also want those spaces where they can just decompress. And so some of those pocket parks that overlook a detention pond, or some of those areas that are not necessarily the most flashy, I still think are things that our residents are starting to value more now than what they maybe have in the past.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the things that we've seen is, smaller intentional spaces that just allow you to have an extension of your home. You love your home, you love to be in your home, but sometimes you don't want to be around all the people, but you want to walk out of your home to the park next door with your family or with your significant other and just kind of be and, have a moment to yourself. And so I think that those are probably going to be more of the pieces that people want to see. We've also heard in Texas, we've done a little bit of research, and I'd be curious if you had any comment on this, but cricket, just with the changing demographics in the Texas area, it seems to be something that communities are starting to look at more so is how can you incorporate cricket, or even with, the lifestyle programming, do you incorporate a cricket league into your community? Have you seen that at all in your area?
So I haven't seen it in Jubilee. And I will say, when I was at Riverstone, though, and cricket, and I did a little bit of research on this, and because we did get some feedback regarding this when I was in Riverstone, and cricket is very big and very popular in Southeast Asia. And so our demographic in Riverstone is very much in that demographic. They probably are the majority of the residents and within Riverstone. And so we had, and several residents over the years, we did annual surveys of lifestyle. We had several residents bring that up and bring up the potential of trying to add and some sort of cricket facility and within the community. That goes back to what I shared earlier, and Riverstone just didn't have, and probably doesn't have still, and any space for it. There's some pretty rigid requirements and some pretty and good amount of space needed and to make that possible. And that's where it becomes harder once the community is nearing the end and there's not a lot of open spaces. And there's a lot of open space in Riverstone. You walk through Riverstone, there's a ton of lakes, a ton of trail systems, a ton of and parks. There's just not a lot of open, unused land that you can pop a cricket court on or cricket field on. But yes, I have seen, and with that demographic moving into the Houston market, I don't know if it's Texas overall or Houston more specifically, but I have seen them and request that, and it's become and definitely popular.
That's really good insight. It always comes down to the space, it seems. Well, Nick, I could we could talk to you all day long, but this is when we start to transition to the end of our podcast, and we have 2 questions that we love to ask every guest. We always have just really interesting, responses come out of it. But what do you have what sources of inspiration do you draw from, either in your personal or professional life?
That's a great question. And I think, outside of family, because, family has an important part to it, but I think what family instilled in me was the love to travel. And so I honestly think a lot of my inspiration comes from my travels. And I travel what people would consider, I guess, quite extensively. And so I go to different countries pretty much every year. And I think I get a lot of inspiration from and the sights that I see, the people that I meet, and the opportunities and the offerings that are in different countries. And so nothing quite yet that I can point to at Jubilee yet, but there's some things in the workings right now of, various trips that I've been on that I said, oh, that looks very cool, or I really like that design that I'm hoping that we're able to integrate as that community develops. But overall, I think that a large source of inspiration comes from my travels.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. You are a student of experience just with your event background and where you're at today. And then our last question is, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
I would tell my 20, and that was not that long ago. So
No,
that,
it wasn't. I was
and
gonna say that.
but I would tell my 25-year-old self to just and take every opportunity that presents itself and to say yes and experience those opportunities and not to be afraid and to try new experiences, whether it's work related, whether it's personal, and because that's where the greatest opportunity ultimately comes from is when you put yourself out there.
A good example of that, because we've known each other a while, Nick, is the leadership program that kind of crossed over, like you said, sort of professional, but also personal development. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I have a bad and personality trait that I don't say no very often. And so with that I've been involved in a number of various programs which I've loved, I've been really enjoyed. And I was a board member for years with the Texas Festival and Events Association, and I went through and two chamber leadership programs. Absolutely loved it. You got to be a part of a group of 45 to 50 people from all different and industries, and the ones I was a part of are in Fort Bend County, but we got to learn all about the county, how the county operates. And I have since become the co-chair of one of those in Central Fort Bend Chamber leadership programs. And so now going on my second year, I'll be co-chairing it again. It's a 9-month program. And so again, I love doing it. It's a great opportunity to network. It's a great opportunity to get people out of their shells, to learn more about how the county operates, how they can get involved. And Fort Bend County is a pretty engaged community. They have a lot of nonprofits. So how can you get involved when it relates to that? And how can we all help each other and succeed? And so that was, the factor behind it. And so when the opportunity came up, while Jubilee is not in Fort Bend County, I live in Fort Bend County. I live in one of our communities, and I jumped right at it because I was like, absolutely, I want to be a part of that. And I love the program myself. And so being able to give back and help in that and in that regards is amazing.
I just think that's such a great example of, we work in communities, but to how to become part of the community. And so I wanted to really highlight that because you not only just dipped your toe in, but you, like you said, you don't say no very well. You just dove in head first. And I think that could inspire a lot of people earlier in their career to say, hey, jump in 100%, right?
Yeah, you gotta jump in, you gotta meet new people. I mean, that's how you open doors is just by meeting new people. And it's not necessarily an open doors in a sense of, you know, shifting a job, right? I love my job. I have no intention of making a jump on that perspective, but it's jumping in to get new resources, new ideas, new contacts, and to be able to elevate the offerings and for the residents or the offerings that we're able to do within each of our respective communities.
Well, Nick, Johnson Development is very lucky to have you. You are so talented in so many different ways, and we are lucky to have you join the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining. We appreciate you so much. And thank you to our audience for listening. If you want to know more about Nick, where can they find you at? Is it
You
Nick?
caught me off guard with that question. And if you want to know more about me, yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn there, Nick Deacon, and
That's good.
We can leave it there. Thank you so much. And until next time, we will see you again. Thank you.
Great to see you,
sounds
Nick.
great. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.